The lawyer's words hung in the air like smoke from a pistol barrel. To my beloved mother, Catherine Miller, I leave everything. I watched my daughter-in-law's face drain of color. Just 3 hours earlier, she'd stood in my kitchen, manicured nails tapping against my granite counter, telling me I shouldn't expect a single dollar from Jason's estate. He's made provisions, she'd said, her voice dripping with honey-coated venom, for his real family. Real family. As if 32 hours of labor, 20 years of scraped knees and homework help, college tuition I couldn't afford, as if none of that counted. But I'd smiled, nodded, offered her coffee she didn't drink. Sarah's perfectly injected lips trembled. Her hands gripped the armrests until her knuckles turned bone white. "There must be some mistake," she whispered. The lawyer, a thin man named Peterson with wire-rimmed glasses, shook his head. "No mistake, Mrs. Miller. The will is quite clear. Your late husband's entire estate, the investment portfolio, the real estate holdings, the business interests, all transfer to his mother, Catherine Miller, with one exception." Sarah leaned forward. Hope flickered across her surgically perfected face. "You receive the house in Westchester," Peterson continued, "provided you maintain it for a minimum of 2 years before selling." The hope died. I knew why. That house had a mortgage of $2 million. Jason had bought it to impress his wife's country club friends. The monthly payments alone would devour her teacher's salary. Yes, she actually worked, though she treated it like a hobby between spa appointments. "This is insane," she said. "I'm his wife. I have rights." "You do," I replied calmly. "You have the right to hire a lawyer and contest the will. It'll take years, cost you hundreds of thousands in legal fees, and you'll lose." Jason was meticulous about his documentation. She turned to me, and I saw it then. The rage behind those blue contact lenses. "You manipulated him. He was sick, vulnerable." "He had stage 4 pancreatic cancer," I interrupted. "But his mind was sharp until the morphine took over in the final week. He signed this will 3 months before diagnosis. Would you like to see the medical records proving his competency?" Peterson slid a folder across his desk. I'd prepared for this moment, every contingency, every possible challenge. Sarah didn't touch the folder. She was smart enough to know she'd already lost. "You'll regret this," she said quietly. "Both of you will." She stood, grabbed her Birkin bag, the one Jason bought her for their anniversary, $15,000 he'd borrowed from his business line of credit, and walked out. Her heels clicked against the marble floor like a countdown timer. When the door closed, Peterson cleared his throat. "Mrs. Miller, I have to ask, are you sure about this? Your son's will is unusual. Most people leave everything to their spouses." "My son learned some hard truths in his final months," I said, "about loyalty, about who actually cared for him versus who cared about his money. That wasn't the whole truth. But Peterson didn't need to know everything. He didn't need to know about the documents I'd found in Jason's office after he died, the prenuptial agreement Sarah had refused to sign, the private investigator's report showing her affair with Jason's business partner, the emails discussing how they'd planned to push Jason out of his own company. My son had died believing his wife loved him. I'd made sure of that. Some mercies are necessary. But Sarah? She'd get exactly what she deserved. Nothing. The first call came that evening while I was making dinner. Just chicken and rice, nothing fancy. I'd stopped cooking elaborate meals after my husband died 10 years ago. No point when you're eating alone. "Mom?" My daughter's voice crackled through the phone. "Is it true? About Jason's will?" Emily lived in Portland with her husband, David. We talked once a month, usually when she needed something. I loved her, but I wasn't blind to her faults. She'd inherited her father's dreamy optimism without his work ethic. "It's true," I said, stirring the rice. Silence stretched between us like a chasm. I could hear her breathing, calculating. "I don't understand," she finally said. "Why would Jason leave everything to you?" He and Sarah were married 5 years. 6, I corrected. And he had his reasons. What reasons? Mom, this doesn't make sense. Sarah's devastated. She called me crying for an hour. I'm sure she did. What's that supposed to mean? I turned off the stove and walked to my kitchen window. Outside, October rain hammered the streets of my Philadelphia neighborhood. I'd lived here 40 years, raised 2 children in this row house, buried my husband in the cemetery 3 blocks away. The maple tree in my front yard had been a sapling when we moved in. Now its branches scraped against the power lines. Emily? I said carefully. Did Sarah tell you about the affair? Another silence, this one longer. What affair? Never mind, it's not important now. Mom, you can't just say something like that and… Your brother left me his estate because he trusted me to handle it properly. That's all you need to know. Handle it how? Are you going to give Sarah her share? Mom, she's family. She was Jason's wife. You can't just cut her out completely. There it was, the real question. The thing everyone would be asking. No, I said. Mom! Emily, I'm tired. We'll talk later. I hung up before she could argue. My daughter meant well, but she'd always been naive about money. She and David lived paycheck to paycheck, drowning in student loans and bad decisions. They'd already asked Jason for money twice, once for David's failed restaurant, once for Emily's MLM scheme that sold overpriced leggings. Jason had given it to them both times, because he was kind, because he was soft, because he wanted to believe the best in people. I wasn't soft. My phone buzzed. A text from Emily. David says we should lawyer up. This isn't right. I deleted it without responding. Let them hire a lawyer if they wanted. They'd find the same thing Sarah would find. Jason's will was airtight. He'd spent months preparing it with one of the best estate attorneys in Pennsylvania. I ate my dinner alone, watching the rain, thinking about my son. I didn't wait for Marcus to catch up. I walked out into the street, the cool autumn air biting at my face. The traffic hummed around me, the steady rhythm of a world that didn't stop for personal dramas or moral reckonings. It felt good to be in control, to have a plan that didn't involve pleading or asking for favors. I had leverage now, and Marcus Grant would feel it. I didn't look back. The next few weeks passed in a blur of legal meetings, phone calls, and paperwork. I kept a steady eye on the clock, watching the 60-day deadline tick closer. Jason's fading had been a devastating blow, but I had spent too long playing the role of the grieving widow to let Marcus get away with what he'd done. My son, Alex, had done his part. He had been the one to hire the investigator, the one to dig through Jason's life and find the dirt I needed to exact some kind of retribution. He didn't talk much about it. He wasn't the kind of kid who wore his emotions on his sleeve. But I could see the satisfaction in his eyes every time he dropped another tidbit of information in my lap. He understood. Marcus hadn't made a single move toward buying me out, despite our initial meeting. He had probably hoped that I'd forget about the whole thing, that the photos would lose their sting over time. But he underestimated me, and he underestimated how badly I wanted to ensure Jason's legacy didn't fall into the hands of someone like him. I had already reached out to potential buyers. If Marcus didn't buy me out, I'd sell the company to the highest bidder. If I had to ruin his life to do it, so be it. There was one afternoon, a few weeks in, when I was sitting in my office, going over some papers when Alex called me. His voice was tight, something in it that I couldn't place. Mom, you need to come to the office, he said. Now. The urgency in his voice was all I needed. I grabbed my coat, walked to the elevator, and stepped into the street. It wasn't far to the office, just a few blocks, but I could already feel the pulse of tension in the air. Something had changed. By the time I walked through the front door of the office, I could already hear the murmur of voices coming from the conference room. The door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open and stepped inside. Alex was standing next to Marcus. Both of them were facing a group of lawyers. Mom, Alex said, his eyes flicking to me. Marcus wants to meet again. He's ready to buy you out. Marcus's expression was tight, a mask of controlled frustration. He didn't speak. I felt the tension settle deeper into the room. This wasn't a simple negotiation. There was something else at play here, something unspoken. I'm listening, I said, taking a seat at the conference table. We're prepared to offer you $15 million, Marcus said, finally breaking the silence. It's not the full amount you wanted, but I'm sure we can find a way to make this work without dragging everything into the press. I almost laughed. $15 million. He must have thought I was a fool. I met his eyes, feeling a surge of satisfaction at the way he shifted under my gaze. He knew it was a lowball offer. He knew I wasn't going to accept it. I think you misunderstand, I said coolly. You don't get to offer me anything. You're the one who has the problem, not me. Your affair with my son's wife isn't just a personal betrayal. It's a business problem too. And now you've got 30 days to come up with the $22 million we agreed on. If you can't, you know what happens next. Marcus gritted his teeth. You're really going to ruin me over this? Over something that happened years ago? I'm not ruining you, Marcus. You did that all on your own. You've had months to make things right. I gave you a choice. Now you're down to your last option. His gaze shifted to Alex, who hadn't said anything yet. Alex stood there, arms crossed, looking every bit the image of his father. He wasn't angry. He wasn't sad. He was just waiting. I'd raised him well. Marcus finally turned back to me. I'll have to take this to the board, he said, his voice strained. They won't be happy. This isn't just about money, Catherine. There's more at stake here than you realize. Don't waste my time with threats, I replied. The board can't do anything without my vote, remember? I have Jason's shares. I hold the majority. Marcus looked around at the group of lawyers. One of them, a young woman with dark hair, seemed to be watching the exchange with a calculating expression. I'll need to discuss this with my team, Marcus muttered, turning toward the door. Alex and I watched him go. There was no more pretense, no more charm, just the look of a man who realized he had no way out. Once the door clicked shut behind him, I turned to Alex. What did he want to say? Alex shrugged. He's desperate, but he's playing a game. He'll try to spin this into something else, try to get me involved. He's scared. I nodded. Good, let him be. The next few days were a blur. Marcus called several times, each time offering a new excuse or a half-hearted negotiation attempt. Each time I shut him down. I wasn't interested in his apologies or his justifications. He had made his choices and now it was time to pay. By the end of the week, my attorneys were drafting up the final paperwork. Marcus was running out of time, and I knew he was beginning to panic. The fear was palpable. It had always been the best weapon in business. People make mistakes when they're scared. On the morning of the 30-day deadline, I received an email from Marcus. There was no offer attached, just a simple message. Catherine, I'm done fighting. I'll wire the $22 million today. Consider this the end of it. I smiled as I read it. This was it, the end game. I forwarded the email to my attorneys, and by the time Marcus realized he'd lost, the money had already been transferred to my account. The deal was done. Later that day, I met with Alex again. We sat in the same conference room where I'd faced Marcus weeks before. Now what? Alex asked, his eyes gleaming with the satisfaction of victory. Now we move forward, I said, my voice firm. The company is ours. We'll decide what happens next. And as for Marcus, well, he'll have to live with the consequences of his actions. Alex grinned. Good riddance. I smiled, but there was no joy in it. Justice had been served, but there was no real satisfaction in watching someone like Marcus fall. I had done what had to be done. Jason's legacy was secure, and my son was going to take his place in the company. The business would thrive, it would grow, and the past would be buried. but somewhere deep inside, I knew that the bitterness of betrayal would never fully fade. We couldn't change what had happened, but we could make sure it never happened again. Sarah showed up at my door 3 days later. It was early evening, that blue hour when the light turns melancholy and street lamps flicker on one by one. I'd been expecting her. The will reading had been the opening shot. Marcus had been the second move. This was the counterattack, the desperate play of someone running out of options. She stood on my porch, rain-soaked and shaking. Gone was the polished country club wife with her highlighted hair and designer clothes. Her hair hung limp and dark with rain. Her makeup had smeared, giving her raccoon eyes. She wore yoga pants and an oversized sweatshirt that might have been Jason's. "Please," she said, "can we talk?" I let her in because I'm not cruel, just practical, and because I wanted to hear what she'd say, what story she'd concocted. She sat at my kitchen table, the same table where she'd told me I'd get nothing. The same table where Jason had done his homework as a boy, where my husband and I had paid bills and planned our futures, where I'd sat alone after the funeral, staring at sympathy casseroles I couldn't eat. I made tea. Chamomile, because it was what I had. My hands were steady as I poured the water, added the honey she liked but didn't deserve. "I loved him," she said. "I know you don't believe me, but I did." "You had an interesting way of showing it." She flinched. "Good. Marcus told me you knew about us." "Yes." It was over. Months before Jason got sick. It was a mistake, a stupid moment of weakness. "It was an affair that started 6 months into your marriage," I interrupted. "And according to the investigator's report, it never really ended. You were with Marcus the night before Jason died. While your husband was in the hospital, pumped full of morphine and barely conscious, you were in Marcus's bed." Her teacup rattled in its saucer. "That's not true." I pulled out another folder from the drawer where I kept them organized. More photos. These ones recent, dated and time-stamped. Sarah entering Marcus's apartment building at 8:47 p.m., leaving at 3:23 a.m., her hair messy, her blouse buttoned wrong. She started crying. Real tears this time, not the calculated kind she'd used at the funeral when people were watching. "I was scared," she whispered. "Marcus was there and he understood what I was going through. He understood that you were about to inherit $30 million, or at least, that's what you both thought." She looked up sharply. "You thought Jason didn't know," I continued. "But he knew everything. The affair. Your plan to force him out of the company. The way you'd already been moving money into offshore accounts. The Cayman Islands, wasn't it? Nice touch. I never... Don't lie to me. I have the bank records. Jason's accountant found them when he was doing the estate paperwork. You'd been siphoning off money from the joint accounts for 2 years. Small amounts at first, then larger as you got bolder. Almost $400,000 total." Silence filled my kitchen like a living thing, pressing against the walls. "What do you want?" she finally asked, her voice small. "I want you to walk away. Sign the settlement Peterson drew up. Take the house, live in it for 2 years as the will requires, then sell it and disappear from my family's life, from my daughter's life, from the memory of my son. And if I don't, then I release everything to the press. Your affair, the embezzlement, that you forged his signature on documents when he was too weak to hold a pen." Her eyes widened. "I never... There are nurses who'll testify otherwise. You visited Jason in the hospital twice alone, both times asking about his estate plans. One nurse, Linda Chen, heard you arguing with him about the will 3 days before he died. She documented it in her notes. Would you like to see them?" I was trying to understand his wishes. "You were trying to cash in. But Jason was smart. Smarter than you gave him credit for. He recorded those conversations on his phone." I hadn't planned to tell her that part. But her face, the dawning horror, the realization that she'd been caught completely, was worth it. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "You're a monster." You're a vindictive, bitter old woman who can't stand to see anyone else happy. You're right, I interrupted calmly. I am bitter. I've buried everyone I love most in this world except my daughter, and even she looks at me now like I'm the villain. So yes, I'm bitter. I'm not the one who stole from him while he wasted away. I'm just the one making sure you don't profit from it. You're going to regret this. I have friends, connections. You have nothing, I said. Your friends are Jason's friends, and they're already choosing sides. Your family has money, but not enough to fight me in court for years. And Marcus? He's buying me out and running as fast as he can. He gave you up in 10 minutes when I showed him the photos, told me everything about your plans, even gave me the passwords to your offshore accounts. That last part was a lie, but she didn't know that. She left without another word. I watched through the window as she stumbled to her car, still crying. She sat in the driver's seat for a long time before starting the engine. I didn't feel good about it. But I didn't feel bad either. This was justice. This was what my son deserved. Emily called again that night. This time, David was with her. They'd put me on speakerphone. I could tell by the tinny echo. "Mom, we've been talking," Emily began, "and we think you should reconsider your position on Sarah. It's the right thing to do." The right thing, I repeated, pouring myself a glass of wine, even though it was only 8 o'clock. "Tell me, Emily, what's the right thing?" "To split Jason's estate with Sarah. She was his wife. Legally, she's entitled to what the will specifies, which is the house with its underwater mortgage and nothing else." "Mom, you don't know that she cheated. Sarah says those photos could be explained. I have documentation, audio recordings, bank statements. Would you like me to email them to you?" Silence. Then David's voice, trying to sound reasonable. "Mrs. Miller, even if Sarah made mistakes, it doesn't mean you should keep everything. Think about how this looks to people." "I don't care how it looks." "Well, maybe you should," Emily said, her voice taking on that pleading tone she'd used as a child when she wanted something. "People are talking. Jason's friends, the extended family. Everyone thinks you manipulated him into changing his will. Let them think what they want. Mom, please, just listen. If you give Sarah even a portion of the estate, it shows you're acting in good faith. It protects you legally. I don't need protection. Jason's will is ironclad." "But the family," Emily started. "Emily, let me ask you something. How much money have you and David asked your brother for in the past 5 years? Silence again. This one louder, fuller of meaning. "That's not fair," David said. $75,000, I continued, my voice steady. "For the restaurant that failed in 6 months because David didn't know how to manage inventory or handle difficult customers. For the essential oils business that turned out to be a pyramid scheme. For the down payment on a car you couldn't afford. For credit card debt you racked up on vacations. Your brother gave you that money because he loved his sister. Did you ever pay him back?" "We were going to," Emily began. "No, you weren't. Because if Sarah gets half, maybe you can guilt me into giving you some too. Maybe you're thinking about those student loans, that mortgage you're underwater on." "That's not what this is about," Emily said, but her voice wavered. "Isn't it? Because I notice you didn't call once during Jason's final months. You didn't visit. You said Portland was too far, that you couldn't afford the plane ticket. But Jason offered to pay for it. He offered 3 times. You said you were too busy with work, with David's job search, with your volunteer commitments. We had responsibilities. You had excuses, and that's fine. People have lives, but don't pretend this is about doing the right thing or caring about family. This is about money you think you're owed." "Mom, that's not fair." Emily's voice cracked. "You sent one flower arrangement to the funeral, $23 on FTD. I know because I saw the receipt in Jason's papers. He'd been helping you with your finances, paying your bills online. You left before the reception ended. Said you had to get back to Portland for David's interview. We did have to get back. There was no interview. I called your landlord later to send you some money for rent. He told me David had been unemployed for 7 months. You lied about why you couldn't stay. You lied about a lot of things. Mom, please. Emily was crying now. I love you, Emily. You're my daughter, and I always will love you. But don't call me again about this. Don't send David to negotiate. Don't hire a lawyer. The will stands. If you want to contest it, go ahead. But I promise you'll regret it. I hung up before either of them could respond. My hands were shaking. I finished the wine in 3 long swallows and poured another glass. Outside, darkness had fallen completely. The streets were empty, slick with rain. A cat picked its way across the road, moving from shadow to shadow. I thought about Jason, about the little boy who'd brought me dandelions from the yard, proud of the bouquet he'd picked himself. The teenager who'd studied late into the night to get into college, who'd worked 2 jobs to help with tuition, even though I told him not to. The man who'd built a successful company through hard work and intelligence and treating people fairly. He'd deserved better than what he got, better than Sarah, better than Marcus, better than the cancer that ate him from the inside, that turned him into a skeleton with his father's eyes. I couldn't give him his life back, but I could make sure the people who'd hurt him didn't profit from his fading. That would have to be enough. I walked out of the bank with the check in hand, feeling a strange emptiness in the pit of my stomach. $45 million. The weight of it was palpable, pressing down on me with every step. Money had always been something I'd never really thought about. Jason had handled that side of things. I had never cared about the numbers. But now, it wasn't just numbers anymore. It was power. It was the key to rebuilding my life, or perhaps destroying the remnants of the life I'd known. I thought about what Marcus had said, about how he hoped this would haunt me. I hadn't been the one who destroyed his marriage. I hadn't been the one who'd betrayed the people closest to me. That was all him. But still, there was a part of me that could feel his words, like a faint echo. I wasn't a villain, despite what he might think. I was a mother who had lost everything and was left to pick up the pieces. As I drove home, I passed the places Jason and I used to frequent, the coffee shop where we'd spent hours talking about everything and nothing, the park where we'd taken Alex when he was a child. All of it seemed so distant now. It felt like a lifetime ago, as if it all belonged to someone else. At home, I locked the door behind me and went straight to the study. The house was eerily quiet, too quiet. The silence in the rooms where Jason had once been felt suffocating. I sat down at his desk, the same desk where he'd spent countless hours making deals, building the empire that Marcus had nearly stolen. I ran my fingers across the polished wood, the same wood that had once been filled with dreams and ambition. I opened the drawer where Jason kept his private papers and pulled out a folder marked Future Plans. It had been there for years, tucked away, as if he'd known he wouldn't be around to see them come to life. I had never read them before. He'd trusted me enough to leave them here, but I hadn't wanted to face them. Not until now. Inside were his notes on how he wanted to grow the company, how he envisioned it evolving into something more than it was. There were sketches for new projects, ideas for expansion, and even a few letters to potential investors. I ran my hands over the papers, my heart heavy with the realization of what had been lost. All those plans, all those dreams, gone. And yet, there was something in these papers, something that called to me. It was Jason's legacy, and it was mine now to carry forward. I knew what I had to do. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. I hired a team of financial advisors, legal experts, and business consultants. Jason's company needed to be restructured, rebranded, and reinvigorated. But it wasn't just about the business. It was about something deeper, something personal. I was going to build something from the ground up, a company that would honor my son's memory, something that would last long after I was gone. Jason had always believed in the idea of family, of loyalty, and now I would take those ideals and turn them into a new kind of business model, one that wasn't built on betrayal or greed, one that was built on trust and integrity. I sold some of Jason's more lucrative properties, using the proceeds to fund the new venture. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was necessary. I didn't want to hold on to things that didn't serve a purpose anymore. They were just reminders of a life that was no longer mine to live. At the same time, I made sure to set up trust funds for Alex. He had been through too much already. I wanted him to have a future that was secure, something that he could rely on no matter what. But I also knew that the road ahead wasn't going to be easy. I was a woman with power now, but power came with its own set of challenges. I couldn't afford to be complacent. Not when there were still people out there who would try to take what was mine. There were whispers at the office, rumors that Marcus was trying to rebuild his reputation. He was working with a few venture capitalists, trying to get back into the game. But the stain of his betrayal was too much to overcome. The board had disbanded, investors pulled out, and the company's future was uncertain. Marcus had been a shark in the business world, but now he was a wounded animal, desperate to claw his way back to the top. I wasn't interested in watching his rise and fall. That was his problem, not mine. I had my own business to build, my own legacy to create, and I wouldn't let anyone stand in my way. One afternoon, as I sat in my office, going over the final drafts of the company's new business plan, my phone rang. It was an unknown number, but the area code was familiar. I hesitated for a moment before picking it up. "Catherine Miller?" the voice on the other end asked. "Yes. This is Jennifer Grant." My heart skipped a beat. Jennifer. Marcus's wife. The woman who had betrayed her husband with mine. The woman who had helped tear apart my son's world. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice colder than I intended. "I want to apologize," she said. Her voice was trembling, but there was no remorse in it, only desperation. "For everything. For what Marcus did. For what I did. I know it doesn't change anything, but I need you to know that I never meant for any of this to happen. It just got out of control." I clenched my jaw, resisting the urge to hang up. "I don't want your apology." "I know," she said quietly. I just wanted to say it. For what it's worth, I left him. I filed for divorce. I can't live with myself anymore." I didn't know what to say. The truth was, I didn't care what happened to Marcus and Jennifer. Their marriage had been nothing but a facade, a lie from the beginning. But still, hearing it from her, hearing her admit it, felt like some kind of closure. "Good," I finally said. "You should have done that a long time ago." She was silent for a moment. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "I hope you find peace, Catherine. I really do." I hung up without another word. It wasn't peace I was looking for. I had no illusions that I would ever find that again. What I had now was something far more valuable. Control. I controlled the company. I controlled the money. And I controlled my future. For the first time in a long time, I felt the weight of everything that had happened, and I realized something important. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about rebuilding. I wasn't going to let Jason's fading be in vain, and I wasn't going to let Marcus or anyone else take away the one thing that mattered most, my family's future. The road ahead would be difficult, and there would be more battles to fight. But I was ready. I had the resources. I had the strength. And most importantly, I had the will to see it through. I was going to build something that no one could take from me. Something that would honor my son's legacy. And this time, no one was going to stand in my way. 6 months after Jason's fading, I invited Emily and David to Philadelphia. The invitation was formal, delivered by mail rather than phone. A request rather than a demand. They came warily, taking the train from Portland. They'd moved back east 3 months earlier. David had finally found a job, managing a restaurant in Newark. The pay wasn't great, but it was steady. I met them at 30th Street Station. Emily hugged me carefully like I might break or explode. She'd lost weight. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. She looked older than her 34 years. David shook my hand with the grip of a man trying to prove something. His palm was sweaty. "Thank you for coming," I said. "Of course, Mom," Emily replied. "We've missed you." That was probably true. Despite everything, we were still family. I took them to lunch at a restaurant overlooking the river. One of those places with white tablecloths and waiters who refill your water glass before you realize it's empty. We made small talk about Portland, about the weather, about David's new job and Emily's search for teaching positions. Everything except the thing we were all thinking about. Finally, over dessert, a chocolate torte none of us were really eating, I said, "I've been thinking about Jason's estate." Emily set down her fork. David leaned forward slightly, trying to look casual and failing. "I've decided to establish a foundation in his name," I continued, "for cancer research, specifically pancreatic cancer." "That's wonderful, Mom," Emily said cautiously. "Really wonderful. I'm donating $25 million to start. The rest will be managed to ensure the foundation continues in perpetuity." $25 million? David's eyes widened. He couldn't help himself. "Yes. Which leaves about $20 million for other purposes. Living expenses, emergency funds, future opportunities." I watched them calculate, hope flickering across their faces like distant lightning. "I'm not giving you any of it," I said. The hope died. "Mom," Emily began. "But," I continued, "I am paying off your student loans, all of them, both of you, and your credit card debt, and I'm giving you a lump sum of $100,000 to use as you see fit." They stared at me. "That's about $350,000 total," I said. "Consider it Jason's final gift to his sister. He would have wanted you to start fresh, without all that debt hanging over you like a storm cloud." Emily's eyes filled with tears. Real ones this time, not angry or manipulative. "Mom, I don't know what to say. Say you'll be smarter with your money going forward. Say you'll stop chasing get-rich-quick schemes and MLM garbage. Say you'll actually visit me more than once a year. Say you'll name your first child after your brother." "We will," David said quickly. "All of it. I promise." Emily was crying harder now. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for what I said, for how I acted. I was selfish and horrible and—" "You were grieving," I said. "We all were. People don't make good decisions when they're drowning in grief and fear. Still, you didn't deserve the things I said, the way I treated you. No, I didn't. But I understand why you did it." We talked for another hour, about Jason, about the past, about the future. When we finally left the restaurant, something had shifted, not healed completely. Some wounds take years to close, but moving in the right direction. Sarah fought the will for 14 months. She hired 3 different law firms, each more expensive than the last. She gave interviews to local news stations, painting herself as the grieving widow cheated by her vindictive mother-in-law. She appeared on a podcast about inheritance disputes, her voice trembling with calculated emotion. Some people believed her. The comments on the news articles were split, half calling me a bitter old woman, half praising me for standing firm. Most didn't. The evidence was too strong. The prenuptial agreement she'd refused to sign, the documented affair with Marcus, the financial irregularities and offshore accounts. Jason's meticulous documentation of everything, including audio recordings of Sarah asking him to change the will just days before he died. Her lawyers kept trying different angles. They claimed undue influence, that I'd manipulated Jason when he was vulnerable. But the medical records showed he'd been mentally competent when he signed the will, months before his diagnosis. They claimed the will violated Pennsylvania inheritance laws. But Jason had structured everything carefully, following every legal requirement. They claimed fraud, that I'd forged documents or bribed witnesses, but Peterson had been thorough. Every signature was verified, every conversation documented. In the end, after burning through $2 million in legal fees, Sarah settled. She took the house in Westchester, lived in it for exactly 2 years and 1 day, then sold it at a $300,000 loss. The market had turned, and the neighborhood wasn't as desirable as it had been when Jason bought it. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she'd moved to San Diego, that she'd married someone else within a year, a tech executive, older and richer than Jason. I hoped for his sake he had a good prenup, and good lawyers, and cameras in his house. Some people never learn. 5 years after Jason's fading, I attended the opening of the Jason Miller Cancer Research Center. It was attached to the hospital where he'd been treated, where he'd spent his final 3 weeks in a room overlooking the parking lot. They'd torn down the old wing and built something modern and bright, all glass and steel and hope. State-of-the-art facilities, brilliant researchers recruited from Johns Hopkins and Penn and Stanford, millions in funding for clinical trials, a comprehensive support program for patients and families. Emily came with me. She was 7 months pregnant with her first child, my first grandchild. She and David had bought a small house in the suburbs, nothing fancy, but it was theirs. David was managing 2 restaurants now. Emily had found a teaching job she loved. We stood together in the lobby, looking at the bronze plaque with Jason's name. Below it, a quote I'd chosen: "In memory of a man who believed in second chances for everyone but himself." "He would have loved this," Emily said softly, her hand resting on her swollen belly. "Yes," I agreed. "He would have. I'm sorry," she added after a moment, "for how I acted after he died. I was selfish and stupid, and I let David convince me that you were the villain. You were grieving. We all were. Grief makes people crazy. Still, you did the right thing, Mom, even when it was hard, even when everyone was telling you that you were wrong." I squeezed her hand. We didn't need to say anything else. The director of the center, Dr. Patricia Holmes, gave a speech about hope and research and the importance of philanthropic support. She talked about Jason, about what the funding would mean for patients facing the same diagnosis he'd faced. "Because of the Miller Foundation," she said, "we're making real progress. We're not just treating pancreatic cancer. We're learning to detect it earlier, to fight it smarter. We're giving people hope." After the ceremony, people came up to thank me. Researchers, doctors, former patients, families who'd lost someone. They all had stories. All had been touched by this disease. I listened to every one of them, because this was why I'd fought so hard, not for revenge, not for money, for this, for meaning, for the chance that Jason's fading might save someone else's life. I'm 75 now, still living in my row house in Philadelphia, still drinking my morning coffee and reading the paper at the same kitchen table where I raised my children. The foundation continues to grow. They've funded 3 major clinical trials, published research in top journals, trained the next generation of cancer researchers. Emily visits every few weeks with my grandson, Jason Alexander. He's 3 now, all energy and questions and his uncle's eyes. Sometimes it hurts to look at him. Sometimes it's the only thing that makes sense. David's doing well. He opened his own restaurant last year. Nothing fancy, just a neighborhood place with good food and fair prices. Emily teaches 4th grade and comes home with stories about her students. They named their daughter Catherine. She's 1 now, just starting to walk. When Emily told me the name, I cried for the first time since Jason's funeral. I donated most of Jason's company shares to charity once Marcus bought me out. Kept enough to live comfortably, but I didn't need mansions or fancy cars or whatever else rich people buy to fill the holes in their lives. I had what mattered. Sometimes I wonder if I was too harsh, if I should have shown more mercy to Sarah, to Marcus, even to Emily in those first dark days after Jason died. But then I remember my son, wasting away in that hospital bed, and I know I did exactly what needed to be done. I protected his legacy. I honored his memory. I made sure the people who'd betrayed him faced consequences. That's not revenge, that's justice. And if some people can't tell the difference, that's their problem, not mine. On the 10th anniversary of Jason's fading, I received a letter. It came in a plain white envelope, no return address. Inside, a single sheet of paper with neat handwriting I recognized immediately. Dear Catherine, I've thought about writing this letter 1,000 times over the past decade. I'm not sure why I'm finally doing it now. Maybe because enough time has passed. Maybe because I've finally found the courage. I was wrong. About everything. The affair, the money, the way I treated Jason, the way I treated you. I can't undo what I did. I can only tell you that I'm sorry. I was young and stupid and greedy, and I destroyed the only good thing in my life. I have a daughter now. She's 6. When I look at her, I think about the kind of person I want her to become. And I think about the kind of person I was. The kind of person I never want her to be. I know you probably don't care about any of this. I know you probably threw this letter away without finishing it. But I needed to try. I hope the research center is doing well. I saw an article about a new treatment protocol they're developing. It's amazing what you've built in Jason's name. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that you were right. About everything. I hope you're well. I hope Emily is well. I hope you found some peace. Sarah. I read the letter 3 times. Then I folded it carefully and put it in my desk drawer, in the folder with all the other documents from that terrible time. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. Sarah's apology didn't change what she'd done. It didn't bring Jason back. It didn't erase the months of pain and betrayal. But late that night, before bed, I said a small prayer. Not for Sarah's forgiveness. Not for my own peace. Just that her daughter would grow up knowing real love. The kind Jason had given freely. The kind that deserved better than betrayal. My lawyer called on a Tuesday morning in March. I was having breakfast, the same breakfast I'd had for 40 years, toast with butter, coffee with cream, a banana. Catherine, we need to discuss your estate planning. I'd been expecting this call for months. At 75, you don't ignore mortality. My father had died at 78, my mother at 81. I was living on borrowed time, and I knew it. What did you have in mind? I asked. You need to update your will, designate beneficiaries, make arrangements for the foundation. It's been 5 years since you last reviewed these documents. I made an appointment for the following week. Sitting in Peterson's office, he'd aged, too, his hair gone completely white. I thought about Jason's will, how it had surprised everyone, how it had revealed truths nobody wanted to face. I want to split everything between the foundation and my daughter, I told him. 60% to the foundation, 40% to Emily. And your grandchildren? Set up trusts for their education. $1 million each, accessible only for tuition, books, housing at accredited universities. Nothing else. That's generous. It's practical. I don't want them to struggle like their mother did. But I also don't want to make things too easy. Money without purpose destroys people. Peterson nodded, making notes in his careful lawyer handwriting. Anything else? Yes. I want a provision that if Emily contests the will or tries to interfere with the foundation's operations, her entire share goes to charity. The whole 40%. He looked up. That's unusual. And harsh. I've learned that money brings out the worst in people. I want to make sure Emily understands what matters. I want her to remember what happened after Jason died. The fighting, the accusations, the way money turned family against each other. And what does matter? Family, legacy, doing right by the people who came before you, understanding that money is a tool, not a prize. He wrote it all down. We spent another hour discussing details, contingencies, tax implications. The boring mechanical parts of fading that nobody thinks about until it's too late. When I left his office, I felt lighter. Like I'd finally closed a chapter that had been open too long. Like I could die now, if I needed to, and everything would be handled properly. The research center announced a breakthrough 18 months later, a new treatment protocol combining immunotherapy with targeted drugs that attacked the specific genetic mutations common in pancreatic cancer. Early trials showed a 47% improvement in survival rates. Patients who would have died within 6 months were living for years. The news made national headlines. The New York Times ran a feature article. NPR did a segment. Jason's name was mentioned in every single one. Emily called me, crying so hard I could barely understand her words. "Did you see?" she kept saying. "Did you see, Mom?" "I saw. It's because of you. Because of what you did. Because you fought for Jason even when everyone said you were wrong. It's because of Jason. He's still saving lives even now." We talked for an hour about the past, about the future, about her son who was starting first grade in the fall and already reading at a third grade level, about her daughter who was obsessed with dinosaurs and wanted to be a paleontologist. "I'm proud of you," I told her before we hung up. "Your brother would be too. I wish he could have seen this, seen what his fading led to. Maybe he can. I don't know what I believe about that anymore, but I hope so." That night, I went to the cemetery for the first time in months. I'd stopped going as regularly. It felt less necessary somehow, like Jason wasn't really there in that cold ground. But tonight, I needed to tell him. I stood at his grave in the fading light, reading the simple stone marker. Jason Michael Miller, beloved son and brother. 1982-2015. "They did it," I told him. "They found something that works. They're saving people. Because of you. Because you left me the means to make it happen." The wind rustled through the trees. A bird called somewhere in the distance. "I'm sorry I couldn't save you," I continued. "I'm sorry all the money in the world couldn't buy you more time. But at least it bought something. It bought hope for other people. Other families." I stayed until full darkness fell, talking to my son, telling him about Emily's children, about the foundation, about everything he'd missed. When I finally left, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. I received one more letter from Sarah 2 years later. This one came with photos. Her daughter, now 8, smiling in a school picture. A candid shot of Sarah and her husband, both looking genuinely happy. Another of the whole family, Sarah, her husband, and 3 children now. "I thought you'd want to know," the note read. "We named our youngest daughter Catherine, after you. I hope that's okay. My husband, his name is Robert, thought it was important. He knows the whole story. Everything I did. He married me anyway, but he made me promise I'd make amends. Or at least try. I tell our daughters about Jason, about what a good man he was, about how I failed him, about how you honored his memory in a way I never could. I don't expect this to change anything between us, but I wanted you to know that I think about him every day, that I regret every choice I made, that if I could go back, I'd do everything differently. Thank you for what you've done with the foundation, for turning something terrible into something good, for being stronger than I ever was. Sarah." I stared at those photos for a long time. The little girl named Catherine had dark hair like mine had been before it turned gray. She had Jason's smile. Then I went to my desk, pulled out a piece of stationery I'd bought years ago and never used, and wrote my first letter in response. "Dear Sarah, thank you for the photos. Your daughter is beautiful. All your children are beautiful. I appreciate the gesture of naming her Catherine. I hope you'll tell her about her namesake someday. Not the perfect version, the real one, flawed and stubborn, and sometimes too harsh. I hope you'll also tell her about Jason, about the good man he was, about the love he deserved and the legacy he left. The past is past. We can't change it, but we can learn from it. We can do better. Be good to your children. Teach them about honor, about consequence, about the weight of our choices. Teach them that love is action, not just words. That loyalty matters, that some betrayals can't be undone, only learned from. That's all any of us can do. I wish you well. Catherine. I mailed it that afternoon. I didn't expect a response, and I didn't get one. But somehow that exchange closed something. Not forgiveness exactly, just acceptance. An acknowledgement that we were both human, both flawed, both trying to live with the choices we'd made. 3 years later, I had a stroke. Not a massive one. I was lucky. It happened while I was making breakfast. One moment I was buttering toast, the next the butter knife clattered to the floor, and my left arm wouldn't work properly. Emily found me 2 hours later when I didn't answer my phone. She'd been calling about her son's birthday party that weekend. She used her key. I'd finally given her one after the grandchildren were born, and found me sitting at the kitchen table, confused and scared, and unable to make words come out right. The ambulance, the hospital, the tests and scans and doctors speaking in careful voices about damage and recovery and physical therapy. Emily moved me into her house during recovery. She and David converted their home office into a bedroom for me on the first floor. My grandson, now 9, helped decorate it with drawings he'd made at school, dinosaurs and spaceships, and one very detailed picture of me and him at the zoo. "You don't have to do this," I told Emily, when I could finally speak clearly again. It took 3 weeks to get the words out without slurring. "Yes, I do," she replied. "You're my mother. You took care of all of us, even when we didn't deserve it." I stayed with them for 6 months while I did physical therapy, relearned how to write properly with my left hand, adjusted to my new limitations. My right side never fully recovered. I walked with a cane now, my hand weak and clumsy. It was strange, being cared for instead of being the caretaker, vulnerable in ways I hadn't been since I was young, dependent on Emily for everything from getting dressed to preparing meals. But it was also good. Emily was patient, kind, strong in ways I hadn't given her credit for. She'd grown up while I wasn't watching, become the kind of woman who could handle hard things without falling apart. One night, sitting on the back porch while David grilled dinner and the children played in the yard, she said, "I understand now." "Understand what?" "Why you did what you did. After Jason died. I thought you were being cruel, vindictive, but you were protecting his memory, making sure his fading meant something, making sure the people who hurt him didn't get to profit from it. I did what needed to be done." "No. You did what nobody else could do. You made the hard choices, the right choices, even when everyone hated you for it." She squeezed my hand. Her grip was strong, sure. When had my daughter gotten so strong? "I hope I'm that strong when the time comes," she said. "You will be. You already are. Look at everything you've built, your family, your career, your life. You did that. Not with Jason's money or my help. You did it yourself. You paid off our debts. I gave you a clean slate. You're the one who made something of it." She was quiet for a long time, watching her children play. Her son was teaching his little sister how to throw a baseball. Catherine was laughing, her aim terrible, but her enthusiasm boundless. "Thank you," Emily finally said. "For everything. For believing I could be better than I was. I always believed it. I just had to wait for you to believe it too." I moved back to my row house 8 months after the stroke. Emily protested, but I insisted. I'd lived there for 53 years. I'd die there too, when the time came. But not yet. I still had work to do. The foundation needed guidance. I served on the board now, attending meetings via video when I couldn't travel. My grandchildren needed their grandmother. Emily needed someone to remind her of her strength when the doubts crept in. And I needed to finish what I'd started, make sure every loose end was tied, every promise kept. I hired a part-time aide, a young woman named Rosa, who who came 3 times a week to help with cleaning and cooking. She was studying nursing at Temple, working her way through school. She reminded me of myself at that age, determined, practical, willing to do what needed to be done. On what would have been Jason's 50th birthday, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of coffee and a photo album. Baby pictures, school photos, his graduation from Penn, his wedding day, him smiling, Sarah beside him, both of them young and hopeful and blind to what was coming. I'd thought I would hate looking at these photos, thought they would bring only pain. But instead, I felt grateful for the years I had with him, for the man he became, for the legacy he left behind. The doorbell rang. I hobbled to the door with my cane, my hip aching from the morning rain. Emily stood there with both children, carrying a cake with 50 candles. "We thought you might want company," she said. We sat together, the 4 of us, looking at photos and telling stories. My grandson asked questions about his uncle, this man he'd never met but who'd shaped all of our lives. Little Catherine mostly ate frosting and asked if Uncle Jason had liked dinosaurs. He was brilliant, I told them, and kind, sometimes too kind. He believed in people, even when they didn't deserve it. "Grandma says you protected him," my grandson said, after he died. I tried. That's what mothers do, right? Protect their children? "Yes," I said, "even when it's hard, especially when it's hard, even when everyone tells you you're wrong." We ate cake and talked until late. When they finally left, my house felt less empty than it had in years. Not full, not whole. Those days were gone, but not empty either. The research center called in October, a year after the stroke. "Mrs. Miller, we'd like to name our new wing after you, in recognition of your contributions and vision and dedication to Jason's memory." I considered saying no. This wasn't about me. It was about Jason, about the lives saved, the families helped, the hope created. But then I thought about what he'd want. "On one condition," I said, "you also establish a fellowship program, the Emily Miller Fellowship for Young Investigators, full funding for promising researchers in their first 5 years of independent research." "We can absolutely do that. That's a wonderful idea. And I want preference given to researchers who've overcome obstacles, first-generation college students, people who've lost family members to cancer, people who understand why this work matters. Of course, we'll work with you on the criteria." The dedication ceremony was in December. Cold and clear, snow threatening but holding off like it was waiting for us to finish. Emily stood beside me as they unveiled the plaques. The Catherine and Jason Miller Research Wing. Below it, details about the fellowship program named for my daughter. "Mom," Emily whispered, "you didn't have to do this." "Yes, I did. You're part of this legacy too. You and your children and all the people who'll benefit from what we built. I want people to remember that, to know that good things can come from terrible losses," she cried. I held her hand and let her, my cane hooked over my other arm for balance. Dr. Holmes gave another speech, talked about progress and hope and the 5-year survival rate for pancreatic cancer climbing from 6% to 23%. About the patients alive today who wouldn't have been without the research funded by Jason's legacy. "Because of this family," she said, "we're winning a war that seemed unwinnable. We're turning one of the deadliest cancers into a manageable disease. That's the power of turning grief into purpose." After the ceremony, a man approached me. He was in his 40s, thin but healthy looking. "Mrs. Miller, I'm Tom Richards. I was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer 4 years ago. They gave me 3 months to live, but I got into one of the clinical trials your foundation funded, and I'm still here. My daughter graduated college last year. I got to walk her down the aisle." His voice broke. "Thank you. Thank you for fighting for your son. For all of us." I couldn't speak, just nodded and squeezed his hand. There were others, so many others, all with stories, all alive because of choices I'd made in anger and grief and determination. Maybe that was the real revenge. Not destroying the people who'd hurt Jason, but building something so good, so lasting, that their betrayal became irrelevant, forgotten. A footnote in a much larger story about hope. I'm 79 now. My health is failing in the slow, grinding way of old age. My doctor says it's congestive heart failure, says I have maybe a year, maybe 2 if I'm lucky. I'm not afraid. I've done what I set out to do, protected my son's memory, built something lasting, taught my daughter about strength and consequence and the importance of seeing things through. The foundation continues to grow. They've funded clinical trials at 17 major cancer centers, published breakthrough research, trained 200 young investigators, saved thousands of lives. Emily visits 3 times a week now. My grandson is 14, already talking about medical school, about cancer research, about making a difference the way his uncle did. Little Catherine is 10, still obsessed with dinosaurs, but also asking questions about cells and DNA and how diseases work. Hung it on my refrigerator like it was the Mona Lisa. Sometimes I think about Sarah, about Marcus, about all the people who thought they could take what wasn't theirs. They learned different, not through violence, not through cruelty, through the slow, inevitable weight of consequence. Marcus's company failed 3 years after he bought out my shares. Bad investments, mismanagement, the reputation damage I'd promised. He works for someone else now, making a fraction of what he used to make. Sarah's second marriage lasted 4 years before her husband found out about her past, about the affair, the embezzlement, the way she'd treated Jason. They divorced. She married again a year later, number 3. I stopped keeping track. Emily and David are happy. Really happy. Their marriage survived the stress of debt and unemployment and my stroke. They're stronger for it. That's what matters. Not the revenge, not the money, not even the research center, as proud as I am of it. What matters is that we survived, that we learned, that we turned something terrible into something good. I'm writing this on a Tuesday in March. Spring is coming. I can see crocuses pushing through the dirt in my front yard. The same yard where Jason picked dandelions 50 years ago. My aide Rosa is making lunch in the kitchen. Soup and bread, easy for me to eat now that swallowing is getting harder. I've been thinking about endings, about how to close this chapter of my life, about what I want people to know. Here's what I've learned. Revenge is easy. Justice is hard. But transformation, turning grief into purpose, anger into action, loss into legacy, that's the hardest thing of all. I didn't set out to be vindictive. I set out to protect what mattered, to make sure my son's fading meant something, to teach people that actions have consequences. Did I make mistakes? Probably. I was harsh with Emily when maybe I should have been gentler. I destroyed Marcus completely when maybe partial destruction would have sufficed. I held on to anger longer than was healthy. But I don't regret the big choices. I don't regret fighting Sarah or pushing Marcus out or establishing the foundation. I don't regret protecting Jason's legacy with everything I had. Because here's the truth nobody wants to admit. Sometimes being a good person means being a hard person. Sometimes love requires cruelty. Sometimes justice demands a price that feels too high until you look at the alternative. My son deserved better than what he got. I couldn't give him his life back, but I could make sure his fading counted for something. And it did. Thousands of lives saved. Families kept together. Hope where there was none. That's not revenge. That's redemption. Rosa brings me my soup. I eat slowly, carefully, tasting the warmth. Tomorrow, Emily is bringing the kids. We're going to look at photos, tell stories, remember Jason together. I'm tired. So tired. But I'm not done yet. I have a little more time, a little more work to do, and I intend to use every minute of it. Because that's what mothers do. We protect, we fight, we endure, even when it costs us everything, especially then. I close this notebook, the one where I've been recording everything, all the details I want Emily to know after I'm gone, all the choices and reasons and justifications. Outside, the sun is setting. Golden light spills across my street, touching everything with warmth. It's beautiful. And it's enough. I did what I needed to do. Honored my son. Protected his legacy. Made sure the right people paid their debts and the right people were rewarded. My daughter is strong. My grandchildren are thriving. The foundation is secure. Jason would be proud. That's all I ever wanted. That's everything.